Good evening. Welcome to Le Vet, which is my very butchered French for the green hour. We're going to be talking about absinthe tonight, and I can't think of three guys in the United States of America that are better qualified or more fun to have a conversation on this topic than the three gentlemen I have with me tonight. So let's go around the horn first and make some introductions, and then we will dive right in to all aspects of absinthe, and we'll start with drinking it. But before we do that, let's start with Brian Cushing. Brian, tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Brian Cushing. I'm the host of the Victorian Barroom on YouTube, sometimes in person. We just basically explore mixology prior to 1900. So kind of the generation that came before classic cocktails, which doesn't get accentuated a whole lot. I really kind of broke into all this kind of realm of things when I was the program director at Locust Grove. And I was I worked on the small farm, early 19th century small farm distillery project. So it was kind of my job to figure out what a small farm distillery was like, how it worked, what they were making. In the capacity of that job, it was one of the neatest things I ever did. I got to train at Mount Vernon, the whole 9 yards, and that's where I met Alan. And we kind of went from there.
Well, that's definitely a good start. And what is your connection to absinthe? Is it through the cocktails that you make?
Yeah, that's one. We use that a lot, especially in the later part of the century. And then the big thing was when I was working on the distillery at Locust Grove, Alan came to me with the research that he had done about absinthe popping up in Switzerland County, Indiana in the 1830s. And wanted to know if maybe we wanted to partner on trying to figure out what that was like and recreating it. And that was a no-brainer to me. Absolutely, we did. It was a great time. It was a great project. And it was so neat because our core interpretation was that part of Kentucky along the Ohio River between 1809 and 1822. So we were very kind of laser focused on what distilling was like in that place and time. But it was really interesting when we got into the absinthe documentary that an hour drive away for us, distilling culture is very different. And so the opportunity to break into that was fantastic. It's not something that I thought we'd be able to do at the outset of the project, but it was just a great direction for everything to go. And it was kind of our grand finale out there.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we'll look forward to talking more with Brian as we're going through the show. We've got some really cool things that he's been doing, and we'll enjoy hearing from him on that. Jim Martin.
Hello, how's it going?
Tell us what's going on with you, sir.
Yeah. Jim Martin, owner of the Key West Trading Company down in Key West, Florida. Now the Miami Smuggler Company. We're expanding it to Miami, and then we'll be expanding into New Orleans with the Spirits of New Orleans. Fifth generation moonshiner from Owensboro, Kentucky, all over the tri-state area there, all the way back to 1883. I'm out here on the front lines on the absinthe realm of things. We make the Death in the Afternoon absinthe. We work hand in hand with Alan, who's on the show tonight, come up with cool new recipes. And this particular one is our homage to Hemingway, and the bringing and kind of on the forefront, so trying to bring absinthe back into being a mainstream, item and a recognized category of spirits in the United States, after being banned for 95 years.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll definitely be getting into that aspect of absinthe history as we're going through. Alan Bishop, how are you, buddy?
Probably had better days. Right now, I am currently suffering with some kind of stomach thing, so I'm literally a shit show instead of just figuratively. So, good times. Just to let everyone know. So
if you exit quickly, don't ask questions.
Don't ask. Something wrong.
All right.
Something bad wrong for sure. So, anyways, I'm the head alchemist of Spirits of French Lick, co-host of Distillers Talk, and various other distilling related media, such as the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, author of a couple distilling related books. And my connection to absinthe is that I basically have been making absinthe the entirety of my professional career, the past decade, between Copper and King, Spirits of French Lick, and then also doing consulting for the likes of Jim and doing the absinthe projects that he's doing down there in Key West, which are really cool, truly unique, authentic absinthes. And of course, working with Brian Cushing on various historic distilling related projects, including an absinthe in Switzerland County, Indiana. So
very cool. And here is one of your Absinthe products. Absinthe Bleu. I'm getting to my French again. Absinthe Bleu. And the right way, which was rye finished in
That's a good one.
barrel. Yep.
Oh, I didn't have that one.
There's just a little bit of that left.
Mhm.
I don't know that it'll survive the spring. And Fascination Street.
Yes, those
Which is-
those last two are two of my favorite things I've ever done.
Yeah. About everything you make, I think this is the best thing Alan's done. So,
Also, ironically, if I make any noise that sounds like Le Bleu tonight, it's not going to be in reference to my absinthe.
got you. Well, Alan mentioned some of the shows that he does, so we want to take just a minute and tell you about Bar Cart Co-op. Alan is responsible for, good grief, half of the shows on here, Distiller's Talk and One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. And if you have Ghost, you have everything, which I was honored to be a guest on recently. Also on Bar Cart, we have My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike and Mitch every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. Live show where craft whiskey is king. David Levine and Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. You can catch his blog. You can catch his podcast. It's all good stuff. And I am the host of a show called Bourbon Turntable. We talk with musicians. We talk with whiskey folk. And we just hang out, talk about whiskey, and talk about music. Sounds kind of fun to me. At least I have a good time with it. I don't know if anybody else likes it. It doesn't matter to me. I have fun. But that's kind of the setup for tonight. And the bottom line is what absinthe, like any spirit or any beverage for that matter, is meant to be enjoyed. So let's talk a little bit about how do you drink absinthe. So Brian, you are the Victorian Barroom gentleman. You are the Victorian Barroom. Tell us a little bit about some different ways that we can drink absinthe.
One of the big things we try to do with absinthe on the show is just kind of demystify it and take it out of the realm of necessarily legend and ritual and stuff like that. So much of that exists because it was illegal. It's like marijuana, and so when the phylloxera epidemic hits let me back up. Absinthe was present in the first bartender's guide that came out in 1862 by Jerry Thomas. It was a minor player. His recipe it wasn't much of a recipe. It was just basically put some absinthe and water together. And that was about it. But once the phylloxera epidemic took out the wine grape crop in Europe and you start getting into the 1880s, it's just finding its way into a little bit of everything because it got popularized because it was something else you could have kind of, as Alan always says, during happy hour. But it was used all over the place in the 1880s and 90s, both as an ingredient and the standalone or main spirit. And so even when we started to round the corner from the Victorian style into the classic style in the 1880s, even though it still had a solid foot in the Victorian style of mixology, when you get the early versions of the Manhattan, absinthe was an optional ingredient in there. And it was interesting because Harry Johnson, who's one of the greatest authors of the 1880s, he recognized it wasn't to everybody's taste. And so he actually did specify to be sure to ask your customer if he wants that or Curacao. But it was an accent. It was an ingredient, the Sazerac cocktail, which is also something that has a lot of mythology and a lot of ritual connected with it now, is really just a modified Victorian whiskey cocktail. That's all it is. It has an absinthe rinse. It has a specific bitter, and that's it. It's a whiskey cocktail, just like Jerry Thomas wrote it down in 1862. And so when you take absinthe as its as the main part of the show, originally they didn't even have the drip fountains. You might have like kind of more of a funnel of ice water that would be held over top of it. Like that, but also there were simpler ways to do it, like the frozen absinthe recipe that I sent to you, also called the absinthe frap. And that was a really easy way of just preparing a glass of absinthe with very common cocktail equipment. All you have to do is have either a mixing glass or a cocktail shaker. You do a part absinthe, 2 parts water, and a teaspoon to half a tablespoon of gum syrup. Shake it up like any other cocktail, drain it into your goblet or your glass, and you're ready to go. And it's just as good as if you do the drip from the fountain and all that. It just doesn't have all of the show to it that we expect now because it's legendary, it's mystical. demystified. It wasn't mystified yet. And so that's kind of what we're trying to get across, is this is just another staple of the Victorian bar. And one of our favorites, my wife is right here next to me, but we like the Absinthe Suzette. That's also from 1888. And absinthe is the main ingredient. You balance that out with a couple of teaspoons of anisette liqueur. You just, again, in a mixing glass or a cocktail shaker, stir it until it's nice and chilled down. And then you add some either soda or seltzer water. Stir it till it's chilled, but not to where you burst all the bubbles. Strain that. Very elegant. And this is honestly superior, I think, to anything that comes from the fountain. And so that's kind of our message. It's you got to take yourself out of the period where it's been illegal, where it's become mystical, and just put yourself, into the mindset of it's another part of the bar. And how do you approach that?
Yeah. Jim, do you have I mean, you are obviously heavily invested in absinthe. Is there a preferred way for you to drink it?
Yeah, and now obviously on the streets and when I first, before we brought the absinthe out in Key West, I went around to all of our accounts. I was just selling bourbon down there at the time, and I went around to all the accounts on the island, and we could not find a single bottle of absinthe on the island except for in one spot at the Green Parrot liquor store. And it was just a bottle of Pernod that was up on like back shelf, and the guy pulled it down and blows the dust off of it. It's like, I think this is what you're looking for, right? But none of the bars, nobody even knew what it was. It had this mythical thing, and like Brian was saying, how they're leaning more towards the demystification of it, and it's just a bar item and those kind of things.
Yeah.
For us and for marketing and for tourism and for sales. We play on the fact that it's all the mystery that goes along with it, and we kind of what they say is there's no such thing as bad press, right? so when people are arguing about it, is it legal? Is it not legal? Can it be legal? Can you have it? Does it have wormwood? It can't have wormwood. You're poisoning everybody's going to die. All that kind of stuff. All it does is create more talk and more enthusiasm about the product itself, even if they're trying to say it'll kill you. Or arguing with you about the fact that it's not real absinthe. That's like the thing you hear all the time. Oh, it's not real absinthe in America. It's not a real thing. Oh my God, you can't use grand wormwood. It's against the law. You're going to go to jail. You're poisoning the people. I've heard everything. And then to the degree that, we even publish like on the comments, a picture of our TTB ingredient list that has grand wormwood. And they're like, you just made that up and that's not true. And we're going to report you to government. You just can't with some people. But at the end of the day, it's talk. At least people are talking about it.
Let's see if we have any of those people in the chat yet. No, not yet. But we'll hold out hope. I'm sure there's somebody out there.
Hit the dog whistle.
So for us, and going back to like the cocktail uses and those kind of things, we see a lot of at the tasting room in Key West, right? When people come in and there's we're giving away samples of the cocktail. So we'll loose an absinthe and then we'll split between 3 or 4 people, in regular plastic cups and things like that. We'll do it in the proper glassware and all that. And there's always in a group of 8 or 10 people, there's always the one girl or guy going, I absolutely hate black liquor, so I'm not drinking that crap. All that kind of stuff. And then everybody else drinks it. And the one person's in the background going, I hate it. I can't even stand to be around it. And then their friends ultimately talk when they're taking a little sniffer of it. And then, they'll reluctantly, oh God, that number. And 100% of the time you give them about 5 minutes and then they're lingering back over the bar. Hey man, you think I get another one of those? Because you tell me, let the effect kick in. It's not, forget the taste. It's not about the taste. Let the effect and let the thujan do its thing. Everybody has we kind of just go with it sometimes. That people think it's a hallucinogenic, has a hallucinogenic effect, or it's a hallucinogen when it's not. But I guess it kind of has that psychological effect on the brain because of what it does with the GABA receptors and all that kind of stuff. So, but some of the stuff we just let them roll with, right?
Sure.
But anyway, for those who don't like the taste of black licorice, if you just absolutely hate it, you can't stand it, you love absinthe, but you don't like the taste, the root of all evil is our go-to. It's like it's a spiked root beer, effectively. And the better the root beer, the better the drink. And we take a Collins glass and ice that up. We typically, like in the Absinthe House, we have all of our glassware is antique period glassware, this old stuff. From 40s and 50s. So we'll get a nice, beautiful Collins glass, fill it full of ice, put the 1 ounce of absinthe in there and then stir it with the big spoon until it looshes. And then we just dash a little bit of Fernet in there, just a little thickening agent, and then finish that off with the old-fashioned root beer. And that drink is literally the better the root beer, the better the drink. And we've even had some really, really high-quality craft root beers that makes a big deal. And then the mint leaf, not an ingredient, it's just a garnish. You just smack it, slap it there on top of the glass so they smell that as they're taking the root beer. Yep. That's absolutely, in my opinion, the best absinthe, easiest for a bartender to make. I'll put it that way. Yeah. And it's easier for people to consume because it's a spiked root beer. Yeah. Too bad we don't have the original sassafras root beer, so it really would be amazing.
Oh, yeah. That does sound good. One of some of our friends, the Ewalds, they'll post cocktails on Instagram all the time. And so I messaged Dave and Adina the other day and I said, hey, you guys do any absinthe cocktails? And 5 minutes later, Dave has emailed me about 14 or 15 different cocktails that they've made that absinthe is one of the ingredients, and this is one of them called the monkey gland, and this is where the absinthe is used as a rinse. And this is the photo is actually the photo that Dave and Adina made of it, and they posted it on Instagram. So if you get a chance, make the chance. That's Adina's Instagram feed, so check her out over on Instagram. And Dave is called Full Bean Group, so you can get in and see what he's got going too. But they have some just gorgeous cocktails, and a lot of them do use absinthe. What's the significance of the absinthe rinse in a cocktail?
Who wants to jump in on that, Brian? Did you catch that?
Hey, Brian, what's the?
Sorry, I had to go.
Yeah, did you catch whatever Alan had?
I missed it. Sorry.
No. Did the absinthe rinse? I just threw up a cocktail ingredient or a cocktail from our friends Dave and Adina Ewalds, and in this cocktail it uses an absinthe rinse. Talk about what the significance is of an absinthe rinse in a cocktail.
There's some thought that it was partially to clean the glass. I don't know if that's true or not, but it does give it practically gives the cocktail just kind of a subtle hint of absinthe. Even early on when, like I say, when it was getting big in the 1880s, they recognized even at that point that it wasn't to everybody's taste. And so they weren't necessarily going to knock you over the head with it. It might just be like an accent. And that was the thing, especially in the mixology at that time, and still today. But everything really, it blended, it played, and it was just kind of, you couldn't tell where, the idea was you couldn't really tell where one thing started and the other stopped,
Yeah.
And for us, our approach is a little different because we want to hit them over the head with it.
Right.
So we don't believe in rinses and spritzes. You know what I mean? Like put that in there. Let's. It's kind of funny story is we sponsor the Hobie in the Afternoon experiment down in the Keys, which is a long running, fart joke, kind of a radio show during drive time. And they've got this guy on there. His name's Scottish Joe. And he's literally just a Scottish guy who's a hardcore drinker, and he's just drunk all the time, and you can't out drink him, type of a guy. So we sponsor the show with the Death in the Afternoon. And when we first started sponsoring the show, he even though we told him you got to mix it with something or whatever, like he still would want to do shots of it. He just he's a hardcore drinker. He's like, I want to do shots, shot after shot of absinthe. And then we talked to him and we're like, try different things. So he tried the root beer one, and he literally over the course of a few months tried literally everything you could possibly mix with absinthe. I'm talking Fanta. I mean, people were just coming up with things just to mix it with. It was crazy off the wall. And after like several months of this, he was like, in a Scottish voice, he's like, I still like it straight, with no louche, no nothing. I just shots of it, and he just loves it straight. So
I love Key West.
Yeah, Key West just hardcore drink, and no one cares. And that's kind of the opposite approach, right? Is we want the full effect of the absinthe, because it's beyond the taste. Ultimately, where you're getting to is how it affects the brain. Mm-hmm. And that's what we always tell people. And Hemingway said that you should drink 5 of them in rapid succession. And if you drink a 6th one, it's called The Sun Also Rises. But we also did it. So at the Absinthe House, we have the Hemingway Challenge, which is if you drink 6 in a row, or drink, consume 6 in one evening, we give you a free shirt. You might not remember that you got it the next day or wonder where it came from, but we charge $25 a drink for the absinthe, right? So they've just paid $150 for drinks to get a free $5 t-shirt.
You have run the equivalent of a claw machine at your car
with absinthe drinks.
Yes, it's fantastic.
Isn't that great? And people are just like, you get them on this thing, and especially once they've already had an absinthe or two. Then you're telling them if you don't do the Hemingway challenge, people are always about these stupid challenges. What do you mean I can't eat 80-pound burger?
Right.
They're just like, I'm getting the shirt. And then
The
by
old,
the end
the old
of it,
96er. Yeah.
they're sitting there barely holding the shirt and barely hanging onto the bar. But then we did, like, when I got this guy down there, they call him Absinthe Denny. And he literally dresses up in green and shit and like dyes his hair green and does. He's really, really into it and tries to pride himself as being like, this absinthe guy. He doesn't really know that much about absinthe, but he's as far as like historically and all that kind of stuff, he's just the character, So like when he's showing you how to do it and all that kind of stuff, he's in it, man. He's living it. And so he does every experiment. He's like, how many absinthe can we drink until we absolutely pass out and don't remember a single thing? Yeah. 11. Apparently 11 is the number.
In the name of science. In the name of science.
But I will say that I have, on I think 2 different occasions, all pretty much consumed an entire bottle.
That's a lot.
I don't know if I'm proud of that or what that really means. But.
All right. So let's. This is the bottle.
And that's the incorrect bottle. That's from the Chinese glass shortage.
Yeah,
that the government.
I've got the other bottle too, but this one's
this is what it should
more
look
full.
like.
yes, and
So
I like that bottle. Bottle.
Oh yeah, how many of you had?
Bottle.
Yeah. So yeah, we ran out of the bottles. Had to use those bottles. Now we're back to the real thing.
Oh, good. But this is a 140 proof.
Yep.
So yeah, it's not messing around.
Yeah, when I got with Alan on making this product, this is our homage to Hemingway, and we did a lot of research and it was important. And Alan was going back and forth on it, getting the color right, making sure it tasted right, loose right, and was a true 1800 style, something that Hemingway would have drank, when he was in France, even though it was illegal and nobody really knows what he did drink. At least, to the best of our knowledge, this would be a very likely candidate of the style he would have been drinking in France.
Yeah. I'll say too, this is superior to anything else we've used on the show. Jim, is there a way to get this like in Kentucky?
Yes. Yeah. Just go to the website, smugglerco.com.
And it can actually be shipped?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Great.
Yeah. We can ship to anywhere but the control states.
Okay. Awesome. We will do that.
I've got a question for you, Jim. Do you know dim and wit? I don't know if that's...
You found one of them.
Yeah, we just found one. I think how many absinthe does he have to drink?
All right, Alan. How, as someone who has spent much of your career making absinthe, what are your thoughts on the best ways to drink absinthe?
Well, I thought you guys were telling me wrong. I thought you were supposed to drink this shit like Jaeger while you leaned against your buddy's 92 fastback 4-banger Mustang that he's had up on cinder blocks next door in the trailer court for the past 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
Specific.
So
was that autobiographical?
Maybe. No, I definitely don't treat it that way. That's for sure. For me, literally just the louche is my favorite thing. And no sugar. Generally, I find that absinthes don't need them. There's a few here and there that can go a little more medicinal that I might use those on. But for example, the Death in the Afternoon, I never, ever use sugar in Death in the Afternoon. Not once, because it's not necessary. But I also like absinthe and coffee. And absinthe and frozen coffee, obviously, is, wonderful as well. Absinthe and root beer is a nice little thing as well. But, for me, and I should probably say that anything that I say on the show is as a representative of Alan Bishop, the Alchemist cabinet, as opposed to Alan Bishop of Spirits of French Liquor anywhere else, because I'm going to get myself in trouble if I'm trying to represent a distillery And that one thing that I want to make sure comes through in the show, and we can get into some more of the history as we go or whatever, but making sure that people understand my stance on absinthe is sort of twofold, threefold, really. So I lean into all the mysticism because of the roots of absinthe going back to the Henriades. That doesn't mean what people think it means. That is a family of sisters in the sense of green witches sort of thing. It's also a title. It's not what people have made it out to be. It's not what people think it is, but also that green witch tradition. I'm a very, very firm believer that absinthe was made as a medicinal type tincture. That's exactly what it was. That's what all the early recipes look like. It was used for stomach comfort for, when you've got problems like I currently have, and things of that nature. And it still remains, in my opinion, and this is what the TTB doesn't like, is when people say things like this. There should be a listing of functional alcohol. And I know that sounds weird, but what I mean by that is alcohol was medicine for centuries, and absinthe has much more in common with spagyric medicine than it does with beverage alcohol. And that's been forgotten, not only in the sense of what it does to you physically as far as relief with stomach problems, etc., but also the sort of lucidity that comes from some of those botanicals that are in the absinthe. It's not a hallucinogenic effect. It's a lucidity effect. There's certainly the ability. The reason the artists loved it so much is because they could drink 3 or 4 absinthes and continue to paint because they had control of their motor skills. Now, that's not saying you can drink absinthe and get in a vehicle. That's not what I'm saying at all. So, but that's something I want to make sure gets put out there.
Okay.
So
fair enough.
And I'll have to say too, just like one of you guys said at the beginning of the show, that it's kind of like weed smokers, right? They're fiddling with the fountain and goofing around with the glasses and the spoons and the sugar cubes and all that. It's just like smoking weed, right? It's just just like I don't smoke weed, but like when I have over in the past or whatever, 50% of it is goofing around with the gadgets and messing around with the stuff and playing with the actual stuff itself, right? It's the tactile feel of it and the ritualistic. That's why if I did, I wouldn't be able to do a vape pen or something like that with weed. I still would want to do all of, the dugout, the bat,
all the ceremony,
the ceremonial type of stuff. And people just, when we do the absinthe services at the Absinthe House or events or whatever it is we're doing, people are just like fascinated just by playing around with the fountain stuff. All this is a drippy fountain. You know what I mean? It's not like it's magic or anything, but it's just, it has that magical effect on you, And so I think, the pomp and the circumstance, albeit it's something that came along later on, it makes it what it is. It's 50% of what it is, I would say. That's the effect. And, and Alan was just saying the drink of it's been known as the drink of artists, for that effect is because you can still do your craft.
Well, and even prior to all the paraphernalia, which people do have a fascination with, and they should, because it's a really cool piece of culture as much as anything. But even before all of that, if you get back into the Val de Travers and you get back into the northern region of France, it was very common in the early 1800s to leave a bottle of absinthe by a public spring or a public fountain. That's as much ceremony and ritual as anything with absinthe has ever been. So it's certainly tied to the roots and the tradition of the drink overall.
Yeah. Let's talk one more thing about how to drink it, and that is the famous Death in the Afternoon cocktail. Jim, you sent me this. This is very very neat way to present it. So tell us about Death in the Afternoon, and you chose to name your absinthe after this cocktail that's made famous by Hemingway.
Yeah, of course, Death in the Afternoon is a book that Hemingway wrote called Death in the Afternoon. And then what got me thinking about absinthe to very start with was the Bourbon women down in Key West. One of the ladies there had mentioned it. She's like talking about Death in the Afternoon, the cocktail. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And that's kind of what got the ball rolling on the whole absinthe, my thoughts about the absinthe and all that kind of stuff. And then I guess the story is that Hemingway was a diabetic, and he didn't want to drink it with the sugar cube like traditionally it's done. So he just used champagne to loose the absinthe. And when we put the service into Little Palm Island in the Keys, which is probably the most expensive a private island in the Keys that like movie stars go to and things like that. It's a very, very expensive place to go. And you can't have your cell phones out in public and things like that, because the celebrity aspect of it. They have the actual Death in the Afternoon service there. The guy, the sommelier, did the research and found the champagne that Hemingway was using, and it's $3,500 a bottle today. So that at Little Palm Island, you can have a real Death in the Afternoon service for $4,000.
Wow.
For four people, it's four. You get one bottle of champagne and you get 4 servings.
So if you do 6 of those, do you get a T-shirt? Here,
Well,
I've dropped $25,000 on cocktails. I better get a T-shirt.
well, and the guy when I took
that's called the second mortgage absinthe service.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was out there at we're training the staff and all that, and the food and beverage manager was talking to me, and I brought up the whiskey or whatever, the smugglers or whatever, and he's like, "How much is your smugglers or whatever?" And I told him the price or whatever, and he goes, "Oh," he goes, "Well, our average pour here for whiskey is $200 a pour."
Wow.
And he's like, "We have everything." He goes, I guess the thing saying at Little Palm Island is just that we don't say no to anything.
Yep.
So you can get anything you want on this island, period. So they have everything under the sun and then some.
So they have Blanton's.
They got the corks at least in the little thing. A collection of corks. And at one time the problem with these resorts and stuff is they go through managers like water, but they don't stick around. But at one time they were going to take the Death in the Afternoon and put it in each one of the cabanas. There's 50 cabanas there, and they told us that the average spend per day per person, not for the room, just spend, just like what you spend on the island, is $3,000 a day per person, over and above the 10, 12, 15,000 night, whatever time of year it is. So anyway, so that's that is the most accurate way to do a Death in the Afternoon is with, and of course, Hemingway, you got to remember, was a celebrity, so he didn't pay for any of that stuff. He probably never paid for anything. He was a big time celebrity. So it's not like he paid anything at all for the champagne, and do the guy who owned the winery in France, he was buddies with the guy, and they would give him cases of the champagne. So who knows if that was the real story? If it, maybe he was just like, I got this pile of champagne here, maybe I'll mix it with this absinthe and see what happens.
What if you know the guy that makes the absinthe?
You get free bottles, right? And then the Death in the Afternoon, I wanted to, relate to Hemingway and the fact that we were doing this homage to Hemingway, but without being sued. Right. So I connected with this guy. His name is Philip Green. I don't know how many people have heard of Philip Green, but he's an author, and he wrote a book called To Have and Have Another, and he just did a Drinkable Feast, which these are Hemingway cocktail companion books, and he's a Hemingway historian. So when I reached out to him, originally was talking about name it Death in the Afternoon, and he actually compiled all of the information from all of Hemingway's writings where he referred to absinthe. And then also the Hemingway letters. That's how we know about stories about Hemingway, because he would write in his letters about going to his house in Cuba, getting some bootleg absinthe and other things you weren't supposed to bring back to the United States. They'd, on their way back to Key West, they would stop at an abandoned key and drop everything off and hide it, and then come into Key West and get the boat checked. And then 2 weeks later, they'd go fishing, right? And they'd go pick the booty back up. And then he'd have this absinthe, and he'd write to his friends in Chicago, for example, in letters and say, hey, I got these bottles of absinthe, and here's how we got it. And I've got these bottles put back for you for when you get down here. He never referred to a specific brand of absinthe, probably because it was illegal and it really wasn't branded, right? And I think Al and I talked about this. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what absinthe he was actually drinking, but you got to remember it was an illegal product. So it's like saying, what kind of cocaine were you using? I mean, it's not like there's a brand on it. And I think, Alan, maybe you're the one that somebody brought it up as like over in France, or when he was traveling around, it was illegal in those countries too. They would take an anise bottle and they would pour real absinthe in the anise bottle and then still serve it to the table. For someone like Hemingway, who's a celebrity, remember? Yeah. So it'd be like if Jay Leno came to your restaurant, right? You're going to give him anything he wants on the top of everything, and he pays for nothing.
And in the Val de Travers, I mean, although it was illegal, the cops overlooked it because it was such a big part of the culture. Like they weren't out actively searching out absinthe producers at that time because it was such an active part of that culture. But I remember that was one of the first things when I met you, when I went to Key West that time, Jim, we started having conversations after that. And that was the first thing I said to you. I was like, Key West needs an absinthe tradition, because you can just, if you ever go to Key West, like you have to go somewhere in public and have a glass of it. It's very similar to New Orleans. Yes. It has a very similar feeling to it, You got to sit somewhere and just drink a few glasses of absinthe and watch people just wreck their entire day. It is a worthwhile human pursuit at least once in your lifetime. Start out early, and
It's great.
It's wonderful. It really is. And then it's really a spiritual thing where that night you go to bed and you go, I don't have it that bad. Not really.
I'm doing pretty good.
Right.
And we've created that. So now you can go to Key West and go to the Saint Hotel, and it's on the 7 Deadly Sins menu. And you can go to someplace like Blue Heaven, which is you would never think they would have an absinthe drink at Blue Heaven, but it's on the menu at Blue Heaven. You can go to General Horseplay and got a full fountain service, the whole 9 yards. And, they've got the root of all evil there on the menu, you can order it on your phone. You can order a root of all evil at General Horseplay in Key West. I mean, it's that now, like I say, we kind of went from couldn't find a single bottle on the entire island to creating an entire absinthe program and making it mainstream, which was the goal, right? And also to get out in front of other brands and things like that, so that when the big boys did jump into it, or some of the conglomerates or the Sazeracs of the world come out with something to get into it, all it does is legitimize us, right? We're already there. We're already established. We've been here. Where you boys been? We've already been here for a while. So, and then that kind of brings it back to like what you guys were talking about, like calling it Death in the Afternoon. That's how I was able to reference Hemingway. So I didn't know this until talking to Philip Green, is that song titles and book titles are not trademarkable. So otherwise there would only be one love song, right? Or I Love Susie. So you can call anything a Death in the Afternoon. That's even though Simon and Schuster own the rights to Death in the Afternoon, the book, you can call your product Death in the Afternoon. And so the Hemingway name or the Hemingway brand is owned by Luxury Brands Limited, which is basically anybody who wants to be associated with Hemingway, like the rum company down in Key West. Those are Bacardi guys. They don't really have anything to do with Hemingway other than they pay them to use the name. And then because they pay them to use the name and pay royalties, then they met members of the family, and then they try to, after the fact, legitimize their connection where they're, and I'm not talking shit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking shit about those guys. I'm just telling you the way that it works is that's the Hemingway Rum Company has nothing to do with Hemingway or the history of Hemingway. It has to do with checks that are written.
Sure. Sure.
Right.
Yep.
So we could have been Hemingway Absinthe, or, had some real thing to it. But, and we did get a cease and desist letter, by the way.
Absinthe has got such a long history of that too. I mean, all the way down to, the early doctor buying it from the Henriots, from Mayor Henriot, and buying, quote unquote, is a pretty liberal term for what actually happened. So yeah, that's just the way that business works. It's the way the alcohol business goes. So
it's the way the business works, man. There's only, it's just like business in general. I don't want to get to the grand scheme of things, but it's the BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard way of doing things, right?
Yep, very much so.
All right. Before we put on our tinfoil hats, let's talk a little bit, and I'm not saying we don't need them. Let's talk about...
If you have ghosts, you have everything.
Everything you need.
I'm only paranoid because people are all out to get me. So let's talk about how absinthe is made, Alan. You're the distiller in the bunch. Talk to us about how absinthe is made.
Yeah, so obviously that's the part that interests me the most. Absinthe, as I sort of said earlier, is from a slightly different tradition than a lot of the other botanical spirits are. There are a few that are related to it, things like chartreuse and strega and some of the genopais, etc. But it descends from a very interesting place because it's somewhere between spagyric. I can't say that word tonight. Spagyric medicine. That word just sounds nasty for some reason, and true alchemy. So you're going to find wormwood being used in alcohol production going all the way back to the Old Kingdom of Egypt, specifically in aromatized wines for different medical issues and different ceremonial issues. And then you'll see that come into the world of distillation in the 1300s at the medical school in Salerno, Italy. But it's not really absinthe. You don't really find absinthe until you get to that Val di Traverse region. Now, you'll find things that look similar to it. Certainly, gins and the aquavits and things like that are not entirely dissimilar, but they are much lesser on their botanical load, quite generally. What you'll find with absinthe is that absinthe is made much more like a tincture. And what I mean by that is the amount of alcohol to the amount of herbs is quite literally in a true absinthe, a 1-to-1 ratio almost. You have almost as many solids as what you have liquid within the still. And so as a distiller, that's a challenge, especially if you don't have equipment that's set up exactly right to be able to do that sort of thing. So I've always said that making a real absinthe should be like a distiller's thesis. It is, in my opinion, by far the hardest spirit to craft properly from the proper ingredients and the proper quality of ingredients within any commercial distilling setting. Just finding the ingredients and finding the right quality of the ingredients and the right quantity thereof of some of those ingredients is an adventure in and of itself, and it often requires importing from other countries or buying from 3 or 4 different big stores, and then maybe for something like Petite Wormwood, finding a specialty grower that actually has enough of that to get you any amount of it for what you can use for the product. So very much so for people who consider themselves more alchemical leaning, people who understand the occult roots of distillation in particular, the fact that this descended from, this, what you would literally call, what we now call green witches or hedge witches or granny witches in Kentucky, for example. It descended from a culture of females very, very similar to that in the Swiss Alps, who were making a product that doesn't really resemble a whole lot what is currently in our bottle. It certainly would have been more astringent. It certainly probably was more of a straight up tincture. So all the alcohol was distilled and then the botanicals added, etc. And it was not something you're going to sit down and have multiple glasses of initially. And it evolved over time through the medical arts coming in, the chemistry coming in, being derived from alchemy and the pharmacy, and turned into what we now know it as. So certainly you have to be very passionate about wanting to produce an absinthe, to produce a proper absinthe. And there are a lot of very bad absinthe producers out there. There have been for a long time, specifically because it was illegal for such a long period of time. And truthfully, there is no, to this day, TTB recognized category for absinthe. That's something that Ted Bro from Jade Liqueurs is working on very, very hard, is getting the TTB to properly recognize absinthe as a category, as opposed to a distilled spirit specialty, which it currently is, and something I very much so support him on. And something else I wanted to throw out there is making sure that Ted Bro gets his credit where credit is due. And he was not the only one working on absinthe early in the 2000s, but there was a group of guys. Again, absinthe is weird. It draws weird people in. It has a very strange history. There were a group of home distillers in the early 2000s, a very tight-knit group of home distillers who were very interested in making real absinthe because it was not otherwise available. And Ted Bro was a part of that group. And these guys were the dorks of the dorks at a time when it wasn't cool to be a distilling dork, right? They were all the way in on this and spent years researching absinthe and trying to make absinthe and trading absinthe back and forth with one another, having little get-togethers where they would all come to somebody's house in, a different state, hang out and drink absinthe. And so Ted is really, by far, he was kind of at the forefront of that group because he had the chemistry background to look at what absinthe truly was back in the 1800s and to reproduce a lot of those absinthes through his Jade line. And so a lot of credit goes out to him and guys like even J.L. Garza, a name that not a lot of people out there know. JL certainly had a lot to do with that early absinthe movement as well. So,
yeah.
Hey, Alan, I noticed you didn't bring up the fact that we use the blood of 12 virgins.
That's a different island. That's a different island you have to go to get that. You know this.
Yeah.
I will say that working with Alan, we are constantly. My role working with Alan is coming up with things that are unique and haven't been done and out of the box. And he entertains me calling him up and going, "Hey, have you ever thought about just using straight up gasoline?" So we just come up with like crazy things, and then playing into his alchemy side of things. Maybe if we filter this through like some weird crystals or something, and then to sacrifice a chicken.
It's so funny because I can get super pretentious about spirits because I'm such a dork, but it's so funny to me, Jim. It's first and foremost the conversations we've had about absinthe in the past, where I'll call you and I'll be like, "Hey man, here's an absinthe thing related to alchemy," and I'll dork out on you completely. And I can literally sometimes I can hear your brain clicking, and you're like, "Wait a minute," and then you spit it back at me in a way that I totally never would have said it, and I've been like, and in my head I'm like, two things. that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard, but it's going to work because it's Jim. Right. But that people get so mad about the crystal filtration and stuff like that, right? You're not claiming and I didn't, there's no claim that it does anything. Simply following some old school alchemy. And if you like it, you like it. And if you don't, you don't. And if you think it does something, you do. And if you don't think it does, then I don't care. As long as you buy the bottle.
And it's the same thing that we're going to, like to what Alan was saying. I'm not an alchemist. Alan is hardcore into the alchemy side of things, but just because you can't say that it does do anything doesn't mean that it doesn't do anything. So there's the thing too. You're not making the claims, but at the same time, it's not hurting anything either. And if it adds anything to it, because there's all about the realigning and recharging the molecules and all the different stuff that goes into the alchemy aspect of it. And there's a lot of truth to that. Realign. I come from an electronics background as well, so you can realign atoms and you can change the charge polarity of atoms. There's all kinds of different things you can do, especially crystals have weird effects on things. So like Alan will hit me with some, like he was talking about, some weird thing about amethyst crystals, and only thing I'm thinking is where we're going to get all these amethyst crystals from. That I'm trying to call around and look on the internet. It's like, where do you find bulk amethyst crystals?
Brazil, you should be able to get there from Key West, right? That should be.
Yes. And then you got to get the customs to go, what are you doing with the 1,800 pounds of amethyst crystals? And then can you reuse them, or do you have to throw the crystals away? I mean, do they go bad? Those are the kind of questions that I ask. And then we get with Bill Hockin and working with Bill, and then Bill's like, yeah, Alan's like the architect that designs the house that you can't build. Where are we going to get those stones from, Alan?
Right. Yep.
So it's a lot of fun, but like the next product that's coming out is Voodoo King, which is our movement into New Orleans, and that's the absinthe that is a lavender absinthe, Lavon, just the color, obviously. That's got some special colorants. I don't know if Alan wants to divulge what we're using for colorants for that, but we are going to have a voodoo priest come and bless every batch of absinthe that we do. We're going to fly them out and have them do the whole ritual and everything. I've already talked to 2 different priests, voodoo priests, a priestess and a priest. And then we're going to have around the neck of each of the bottles, I've got a voodoo guy who's going to make little voodoo dolls that you can, that'll be kind of the thing, is like you want to cast a spell and somebody drinks some absinthe, cast a spell.
Do you guys see what I mean now, where Jim says shit where he's like, I've got a voodoo guy, right? And he's just like, because of course you do. Yes. Because
they're not that hard to find. When you go to New Orleans, another thing, like what I've soon found out too, after doing a bunch of research into voodoo and stuff, is that, the voodoo people take it very seriously. And one of the things that we had to watch going into New Orleans with something like a product like Voodoo King was to not offend anyone. They take it's a religion, and voodoo is mostly positive. It's a good witchcraft, or whatever you want to call it, voodoo craft. And so they're actually blessings, and a lot of these things are money blessings and health blessings, and different things you can do. So it's just like anything else. You can use it for good, or you can use it for bad. But obviously the publicity that goes along with it is always the bad side, right? But we're gonna have fun with it with the little voodoo dolls and stuff, and if they're real voodoo dolls made by a real voodoo priest. So it's kind of one of those. It's like a Ouija board, right? You believe in it or don't believe in it, but screw around with it. But beware if you screw with it.
You're playing with fire. You're playing with fire.
So that also too, like my grandfather used to always say, behind every good spirit is a good story. And with these products, we don't want to just throw a product out there and go, try it, don't try it, whatever. We want people to have a story and an entertainment. It's kind of like the cereal box, right? We want the cereal box to be good enough to read the back of the cereal box while you're eating cereal.
Well, another thing I'll throw out here, because again, Jim, I know how that stuff works, and I know how people tend to want to come after you about it for some reason. So I'm going to say this: for the 5 people out there that are going to roll their eyes at Jim's voodoo thing, do you think the Henriot sisters are rolling their eyes in their grave, or do you think they see the connection? Because there's a connection. So just saying, you don't get to be picky about history.
And at the same time, what's wrong with blessing something? What I mean? Regardless of what religion you're in or whatever, whether it's innocuous or it's however much you believe in it, it definitely isn't going to hurt to put a little blessing on it.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And then it gives us some legitimacy to it as well. So we're recognizing the voodoo culture. We're putting out a product that we're tying into the voodoo culture. We're showing homage to it. Everything that's on the label from a symbolic standpoint. I worked with Pasteur and we did a lot of research and made sure that it's not just made up stuff that we threw on there, or like a Chinese written tattoo that says I stink or something. Like we know what the symbolism is, and it all has a meaning and a proper place on the label. And the whole time just trying not to offend an entire culture, right at the same time. And believe it or not, there's voodoo in the Keys as well. It's Bahamian. It's because the Bahamians, came over and had big settlements and stuff in Key West, and they brought voodoo culture over as well. And I remember when I first started going back to Key West back in 2000, the early 2000s, it was very common to see beheaded chickens and blood pentagrams and all kinds of stuff where they did a ritual by the cemetery. So I mean, voodoo is definitely a religion that's practiced, and in different styles of it. Everybody goes quiet. That's like, oh my God, he's talking about voodoo.
I'm listening, and I'm trying to hold the questions back because again, I'm trying not to slip into the "if you have ghosts, you have everything" voice. So
why not?
Turn up the reverb. Turn up the reverb. There you go.
We'll do an episode like that Jim, for sure. That'll be
good.
Cool.
Good.
We'll get your voodoo guy.
Or gal. Or gal.
Yeah, or gal. Either way, yes.
So when will, not to get too far down that rabbit trail, but when will this, when do you plan on releasing this purple absinthe?
Yeah, the recipe has been done for quite a while. And
3 years.
So in this business, it moves at the speed of cash. So we've right now I'm just have been COVID affected the entire industry as a whole, right? So
sure.
Just in regular bottling and trying to keep, like when I came out with the rum and the vodka, it was I wanted to make a good product and make it clean and do all the stuff I wanted to do with it, but it was just like that needs to be in the portfolio. We're not going to sell any of it because Tito's sells all the vodka in the world, right? And we ran out of it, and there's a big, huge demand for the vodka and the rum, which is a great thing to have. But then it also put us behind bottling schedules, and I had to switch bottling. But this is the ranting part, right? Is then this bottle went from $1.23 to $1.98, and then corks went from 11 cents to 50 cents, and the labels went to we don't have ink to print the labels to 27 cents to 48 cents. And so we've kind of been doing the shuffle on that, just trying to restock inventory. And then we've been running, obviously, our fundraising campaign on Start Engine and seeking other investors and stuff, too, to fuel the expansion into New Orleans. This Voodoo King product is the first Spirits of New Orleans product as well. So that'll be our launch into New Orleans. So this year, I mean, for sure, we're hoping to have it in the bottle and going. We're also waiting on Alan to position himself on a few other little projects or whatever, and to be in a position to help us with that. Because with all of our products, we want to make sure we do it right. It's that whole, we will serve no wine before it's time.
Right.
So we don't want to just bastardize it and get it into a bottle just to say we have it. So it either goes in the bottle correctly or it doesn't go in the bottle, as far as that's our company policy anyway.
Yeah. Because I've been holding off on doing my Prince show till I get on Bourbon Turntable till I get some absinthe from this purple. So
purple absinthe. Yes. Yes.
Did you say Prince show?
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, you're gonna do a Prince show around the purple absinthe?
Yeah. What else would you do?
Yes. It's awesome.
There you go.
Yeah, I want to touch on the coloration there too, because I've got a couple of purple absinthes that I've been working on outside of Jim's as well, my own. So there's a funny thing. Again, people get traditionalists get very weird about different colors, unless it's green or a blue or maybe a red. They immediately think it's gimmicky. But my thing is this: if you're using botanicals and it adds a flavor component and it changes the color, what's gimmicky about it? It's another form of tincturing with botanicals, just using different botanicals. And how do you Americanize absinthe? Everything else has been Americanized. American gin, people making American style aquavits, etc. what's the one thing that we have in absinthe production history? And I didn't touch on all the little details of absinthe production before, and I won't, because it takes forever to walk through all the steps. But what's the easy way to Americanize this? So the base alcohol is not, you can use corn whiskey if you wanted to, and whatever, more power to you if you do. But using corn, a unique form of corn in particular, for coloration, pretty cool, I think. So we use maize morado to get that purple color, or to get pink colors, or to get black colors. You go far enough into it and you go high enough heat, you'll turn it jet black almost, which is pretty interesting. And the great thing is, this is raw corn, that the color is miscible in water. It's high anthocyanin, by the way. And again, you can't make health claims, but people can look into anthocyanin and read whatever they want into that. But secondarily, that starchiness of that corn certainly comes through in the structure of those purple absinthes in a way that is very uniquely American, I think. And when I say American, I don't mean, the United States, because this is definitely a South American product where the corn comes from. And it is actually an ancient venerated corn that is used ceremonially. So again, another connection to that spirituality within distillation, within absinthe making.
And what I'd like to point out, or make sure the history part of it's right, maybe Brian can jump in on this as well, is my understanding is that the original absinthe has no color, that the Swiss version of it was the Blanche, and it was France that put the colors in there, so they Frenchified it. Right. So, I mean, and from my understanding too, the stories are that the Swiss made a big deal about the French putting the extra botanicals in there and adding color to it. They thought they were crazy, and that they were gimmicking absinthe, all the way back in, the early 1800s.
So the very earliest stuff was definitely tinctured and colored, but once it became a distilled product, I highly suspect, and from everything I've read very early on, now there were some of the very earliest producers that moved from the Val de Traverse down into France. They were the ones that did start coloring after distillation, but definitely in the Val, it was mostly, well, if we can concentrate what we want out of these botanicals into the distillate itself, then why would we add botanicals post distillation? Certainly. So, and I can guarantee you that if you were traveling the Val de Traverse in the early 1800s, you probably would have seen some other colors of absinthe. There's so many beautiful botanical elements that grow in that region on the mountains that I can't imagine that they weren't doing other variations of color as well at that time. So,
yeah. So let's talk about absinthe in America, because hey, we're Americans, so that's where it matters, right? And Brian, you and Alan did a documentary on absinthe in Switzerland County, Indiana. So, and here's you can find this on the Victorian Barroom YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. But Brian, tell us a little bit about the documentary and the history of absinthe in America, and you and Al can talk about the history of absinthe in Switzerland County, Indiana.
Yeah, and I've got to give full credit to Alan for bringing that research to my attention. I had no idea. We were working on the small farm distillery project. It was a Kentucky distillery project at Locust Grove, but Switzerland County is just up the road. It's about an hour drive, and so it was a neat process. It was a neat process. We basically, what we did was it was kind of built around the Locust Grove distillery at first, because even though this was being produced in Switzerland County, we were really the only facility in the area that had this kind of equipment and this kind of setup to really do it right. But what we wound up doing in the end, once this project really took shape, is we drew in several organizations to make it happen. So Locust Grove started out as the nucleus of it. We did all the mashing there and everything. That's where we did a lot of the filming of, as far as like the process and all that. And that was really neat. But then we also, in the meantime, I've been doing some work. My wife and I both have been doing some work with Musée des Vinoches in Switzerland County, Indiana. There's no truck.
He's been drinking absinthe or
92 4-banger.
So Vinoche, as far as we know, it was a farm in Switzerland County during the 1830s. The original owners, Jacob and Charlotte Weaver, they bought the place in 1828. And as far as we know, they weren't producing absinthe. They certainly weren't one of the two producers that we do know of. Jacob was growing wine grapes, but what we thought was really neat about that was, okay, we've got the distillery at Locust Grove, which is set up with the kind of equipment that they would have had, but it's not in Switzerland County. We've got this historic site in Switzerland County that actually was a farm at the same time, as the stuff was being produced right there on a farm. And so we wrote Vinoge into a lot of that. We actually were able to harvest some of the botanicals that went into it from Vinoge. In the documentary, you'll see Alan actually starting the yeast that it was completely fermented from with botanicals from Vinoge's garden. So the yeast that this absinthe was fermented from came from absinthe botanicals in a garden of a farm that was a farm in Switzerland County in the 1830s at the same time this stuff was being made. So that really just kind of brought everything home when that happened. And that yeast had no help at all. We kind of kicked it around. It's like, do we want to give it a little bit once it gets to the distillery to be sure it ferments right? And that did not happen. It just fermented on its own as Alan made that yeast, which was really great. We partnered with Kentucky Artisan Distillery as well in Crestwood, Kentucky, because even though everything at Locust Grove is fully functional, it's not actually licensed to distill. So what we did was we did everything up to the point that we needed to start the fermentation. We loaded it up in the back of my Ford Ranger, which was a terrible idea. You really can't haul 100 gallons of alcohol or 100 gallons of liquid safely down the expressway in a Ford Ranger, but we did. And we got it there, and they did the fermentation, the distillation. They transferred the spirit in bond to Spirits of French Lick, where Alan then took over everything with all the maceration and all that. And so we walk you through every piece of that in the documentary. It's probably one of the more complete looks at how absinthe is produced that's out there. And then we went back to Vinoge. We got all the partners together and we tasted it. Yeah.
Well, the mistake you made on transporting is that you should put them mason jars.
That's a good point. Previously, we used paint buckets, and the paint buckets were easy enough. We decided to do it in a whole one big tub, and every way the thing sloshed, the Ranger sloshed.
Well, and you're not going to hit a pothole or anything like that driving in
rural
through
Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky.
Well, I was just.
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, no, I was just saying I was lucky that Aiden Pemberton, who helped us out with a lot of this, had stuck around late enough to follow me out there. So
Sam Squatch.
Yeah, Sam Squatch, follow me out there.
He Aiden's like 7 foot tall, so like all the rest of us are struggling with these buckets of mash, and like DJ, I'm bucketing everything out, and then DJ is taking like a bucket of mash over there, and Aiden's just reaching up with one arm and pouring it in the tote in the back of the truck, and DJ's just looking at him huffing and puffing and sweating, rolling down his back of his head. It was great. Real quick, I do want to send out some prayers and thoughts as well. I don't know if anything at Vivi got harmed whatsoever in today's tornado, but they certainly were on the edge of all of those things that happened today. So I hadn't heard anything, but just thoughts with those guys for sure, because what a cool place Switzerland County is, and all the people that we got to meet in that project, including a descendant of one of the original absinthe producers, Griffith Dickinson, which was really cool. And some really neat things came out of this project. So, I talk about that history a lot in the movie about the Henriades, about the Val de Travers. And even though these folks weren't exactly from that exact same region, they were close enough, and some of them were likely descended from that region. That's where their history of absinthe production came from. There's no doubt about it. What's really interesting was they were Huguenots. So, you would think that most of that stuff would have been very, very sort of suppressed in that community. But what I think I have found out, what's been an eye-opener for me, the events that we've done over there between the movie screening and absinthe tasting we did over there and all that stuff, that style of witchcraft, whatever you want to call it, did not die out in that part of Indiana. It is still very much there. There's still very much people who believe in it. And a lot of those people were the same people who came to visit us when we did the movie and we did the tasting. And it's a really interesting culture. It's really cool to find that in Indiana. Can you imagine absinthe in 1830 in Indiana? This is before it's moved out of the Val de Travers and northern France at the time. This is not a thing that is really being drank anywhere other than maybe New Orleans at the time, which is why we suspect they were producing it, and they were producing enough of it that they actually had to hire a cooper to build barrels to send it downriver, presumably to New Orleans. So for that to be a Hoosier tradition in 1830 is pretty impressive and not something that I thought that I stumbled upon it. It was literally an accident. I came across a history book that was the history of Switzerland and Dearborn counties, Indiana and Ohio. And there was one line in there about one of the absinthe producers. And then shortly thereafter, a day or two after I started looking, I'm like, oh, there were people making absinthe in 1830 in Indiana. I found the name of the second, John Detroit, who was the second absinthe producer there in that region. And we even got to go to the original farm that Griffith Dickinson had, where he made the absinthe at, where his distillery was at. And the cool thing is, the minute I stepped out of the truck, there's an annual wormwood plant right there next to my foot as I stepped out of the truck. So a really, really cool story and a really cool way to make that whole thing come back around and to play off of some of the cultural stuff that myself, Brian, etc., were into, you know, these ideas of how cultures developed, how they become isolated. You know, the Black Forest here in Indiana, 6-county region, very, very German, right? And then you go an hour away to Switzerland County, and it's very, very much of that sort of Swiss sort of extraction. And, you know, in their homelands, they're not terribly far away from one another. You can see the cultural similarities, and you can certainly see the cultural differences in their stories and their histories. And it's a pretty special, unique thing, I think.
Yeah. You guys do a great job of capturing that in the documentary. The culture, there's a great respect for the culture there and the history of it all and how it connects all the way back to Switzerland. Yeah. In Europe and Switzerland County in Indiana. It's a really, really wonderful thing to see.
Jim would love this too. There's another connection here, and we didn't touch on this in the movie, and maybe we should have, Brian. But Switzerland County, Indiana, also celebrated Mardi Gras at least up until the 1840s, 1850s.
Gotcha.
So, which is pretty neat. You wouldn't expect that in that region. So,
yeah.
You know, it's interesting because you were saying, Alan, did you say that there was a possibility that they were shipping it in barrels down the Mississippi to New Orleans?
That's very much so what I would expect. Yeah.
Maybe that was the communication back and forth to New Orleans. You know, if your customers down in New Orleans or your connections down in New Orleans are celebrating Mardi Gras, I could see how that would translate up into Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yep. Very cool.
It was by far one of my favorite projects in my career, and to get to work with Brian, who's this is his first film, his first like feature film, and it's damn good. He did a great job. Like, I was thinking about when you were putting that together, I was thinking about all the things we shot. I was like, good luck, enjoy.
There was a couple of times in there. There was a couple of interviews that there was one that I realized that
there's a couple of odd ones.
He was being interviewed. What's that?
There's a couple of odd ones for sure.
Some people are better being interviewed than others, and so they kind of had to be cut up and moved around to make the narrative move forward and all that. But yeah, that was one of the neatest things I ever did too. And I was glad that, because I left Locust Grove early in the project, and so originally I was doing it on work time. Afterwards, it's like, and the reason why Alan and me are listed individually as producers is that we just took it and did it on our own time with our own resources, you know, the rest of the project, just because we wanted to see it happen. And it was a really special thing. But up in County, you can't help but be drawn in to the culture, just because the people are wonderful. They're genuine. They're enthusiastic about it. And their enthusiasm, I think, really fed our project. And so that really, even though they weren't initially part of the conversation, it very much became a home for that project.
Yeah. And the absinthe itself turned out wonderful. And one of the other things that I'm proud that we got to do is not only take that absinthe back to its home, but we also got to go to the grave of, well, we don't know exactly where John Detroit is buried in the Switzerland County Cemetery, but we know the section that he's in. And so we were able to take some of that absinthe back to John Detroit and to the section where there were certainly people that would have partaken of that absinthe and leave a little bit of it for them as well, which is a pretty cool thing to do, I think. So,
and I think it's cool, you know, not being a part of the project or anything, but the fact that you could take a couple of breadcrumbs of information and then put together the entire picture and then memorialize that so that it doesn't just get lost in the history and maybe would have just been completely lost and the story never come to light, where now you've taken it, put it into a digital form that can live on, you know, forever.
Well, and those were some of the fun things I think that Brian and I also figured out. Whereas, like, so any of these historic projects, there's very little record keeping that you can find to prove anything. We think we created something in the spirit of what they created, but you have to look at it as like, I always slip back into my old moonshining roots, right? I go to Switzerland County and I look around, I look at the information we have, and I go, it's not a whole lot of information, but I have a few little things here. And I go, what the hell would I do if I was in that situation? And Patty, right? That's her name there at Musée de Vinoge, Brian.
Oh, Donna Weaver.
Donna, yes, Donna,
Yeah.
yes. So Donna, a great lady, and she pointed out something to me very early on, and it was such a duh. Why didn't I think of that moment? I was talking about the botanicals they would have had on hand. So they talk about how they already had wormwood, was native in Indiana at that time. Now, it wasn't grand wormwood because it's not native to Indiana, but annual wormwood and mugwort both are to that region. And as I'm thinking it through about what botanicals they would have access to, I'm not even thinking, hey, man, the river is literally right there. Like, it's right there. You can see it if you look hard enough, right? So whatever they didn't have access to there naturally that they could grow themselves, they can certainly import from out of Pennsylvania fairly easily, out of Europe. So they would have had access to I'm sure, to things that we don't even realize that they had access to, because it would have been a very easy stop and a great place for mercantile. So,
yeah. And also coming up from New Orleans is a major hub, for things coming over from Europe, and they're already making absinthe down in New Orleans. So if they had that trade route going back and forth, could pretty much just get anything you needed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they certainly could have been sending flatboats down and hiking back up with various things that they needed up the Natchez Trace at that time, and maybe even through other means. But yeah, it's a definitely interesting thing, and I'm super glad that we got a chance to make that happen. And again, Brian did a phenomenal job. Except he couldn't find a way to airbrush out my stomach, which I'm a little sad about. But
So is that just a filter? I thought it was just a filter.
Some days you just look like a shit sandwich, regardless of whatever is going on. So I did figure this out too.
For 3 years, and so it's like you see my hair and Alan's beard expand and contract. This is all filmed in order.
That's true.
The scene where we cut the Spirits of French Lick, Brian's got this giant, massive hair, and it looks like he has like this aura of like Jesus around him in the room. And so both times we did the showing, it's incredibly quiet the whole time, and I'm sitting there, and I've watched it a couple times already, but it gets to the point where it cuts to that scene, and I yelled both times, "What happened to your head?"
So he's like Bob Rossing his way through that.
Yeah, basically. I stopped going to the barbershop during COVID, so it just kind of got big.
It was impressive, dude. You could have made a rug out of that thing.
Yeah.
And this documentary you guys made is kind of similar to the struggle that Alan and I had when we were trying to put the Death in the Afternoon thing together, was the fact that we had some information, and we had stories and we had his right, so we knew the parts that were factual. And then we just at some point have to stop and go, well, what would you do if you were there and you were trying to get a hold of her? Where would you logically get it from, and what would it be? So some of it was just putting the little pieces of the pie together. He's in Cuba. There's only one distillery in Cuba that's making absinthe, and he's writing in his letters that he's bringing absinthe over from Cuba. So clearly that's the absinthe that he was bringing. But then when we posted that, I can't tell you the amount. I thought I was going to be murdered at some point. I had these people reaching out going, there's no way Hemingway would have drank that shitty absinthe from Cuba. There's no way.
He was knew then. Yeah.
That's the only absinthe he could get. And how would you even compare them? Because they weren't even branded. I mean, the one that Cuba was a brand, but at the same time, it was like, it's not like you could get on Amazon or something or Drizzly and order it up.
And they didn't want to have the conversation either. The conversation being, again, going back to the history of it. You can be as pretentious as you want to, but the truth of the matter is that when it was made illegal, a great many of the absinthe distillers from France and the Val d'Itravers moved to Cuba and to Brazil, particularly to work with rum and cachaça and various grapes like Muscat grape to make absinthe with. It was a common thing. Now, another thing I'm going to throw out there that's funny, behind the scenes thing, Jim, that I think people laugh about, because we can all be real pretentious about absinthe and be real spiritual about absinthe and be real symbological about absinthe. But the way that this whole project with Jim and I worked, the story that's never been told, is Jim needed an absinthe recipe and I needed new gutters. A true story.
True story.
If you can tell me one other distiller on the face of this planet who traded an absinthe recipe for gutters, I'll quit the industry.
Hey, Alan, how's you need any garage doors or anything over there? What's
Man,
going
I
on
got
in the
all
house,
kinds
man?
of stuff I need, brother.
Need a new lawnmower?
That's right.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
I got to
right?
fix that 92 fastback at some point.
Well, I'll just put it this way. Even when I was in the technology business, let's say I just got some contracts here and there for Disney tickets and flat screen TVs. So, that's just kind of how it works in the world, right?
Yep.
To kind of segue into to another topic on absinthe. Again, be sure to check out this documentary from Brian and Alan. I put a link in the chat so you can easily find it. And I know I've shared it on Bourbon Turntable, and it's easy to find at the Victorian Barroom's YouTube page. So be sure to see that. You'll really enjoy it. Let's talk about, and we've kind of mentioned it here and there. Let's talk about absinthe's bad reputation and how that came to be. Jim, what happened that absinthe got the bad reputation?
Well, I think from all of the accounts and all the people that I've talked to, and Al and I spending hours and hours on the phone about it, and the more research you do, the more there's at the end of the day, a lot of it is speculation. But I think a lot of what happened was the political climate. No one ever takes into account realistically the political climate. The automatic thing people think is it had Thujon in it. Thujon was poisonous and it was killing people and it was breaking families apart and people were going crazy, so that it needed to be banned. The document that banned it in the United States banned it because other countries banned it. We didn't do any testing or anything else. It was just we were following suit. It was not even an entire page ban from the Department of Agriculture that banned the thing in 1912.
I think there was a TikTok video that went viral on that.
Yeah,
in 1912.
There was a TikTok video, right?
Yep.
There was the two that year. It was the twerking one, and then there was that one. But what realistically to think about is, you had the teetotalers and stuff, and there was a movement in the United States even to ban alcohol altogether. And then over in Europe, like in France especially, they drank more absinthe than wine. So the wine industry, imagine if the Diageo of the United States, there was some product that was coming out that was threatening Diageo's bottom line, and they got big political power. Think about the wine industry in France in the late 1800s. This is a big political machine, and we're talking about a lot of money and old established, political families and so people that are involved in politics that have money that are running the political machine. And so I think ultimately that, it's a mix of a bunch of different things. But, when they did test the bottles from the 1800s in the laboratory, they did find high levels of lead. So there was definitely some lead poisoning that was going on, and the symptoms of lead poisoning are slowly going insane. Right. So I think the absinthe murders and Van Gogh cutting his ear off and all the crazy stuff like that happened was a combination of just, being a drunk. Right. Yeah. And the lead poisoning, I think, definitely played into a lot of that. And Alan could probably speak more on the alchemy as far as like what that kind of stuff does to you. They didn't know anything about lead back in the 1800s, early 1950s and 1960s. It was still in everything in America had lead in it. That's what makes paint smooth and the roof's nice and
and you can peel it right off there and ball it up and put it in your mouth and chew on it. It's wonderful. Yeah, it doesn't
lose its flavor.
No,
so I think that so I think ultimately what happened was, the kind of way we describe it is that the stories about the absinthe were true. Yes, there was the absinthe murder. Yes, people were going crazy. Yes, families were breaking apart. Yes, people were acting nutty. But what they blamed it on, and which was proven in the laboratories, was not the Thujon. And people still to this day, 99.9% of the people you talk to will tell you that Thujon is a hallucinogen and that you hallucinate from it. And then people that we try to get to do absinthe for the first time or try absinthe, it's not as bad as it was at the very beginning, is that the first thing they say is, well, man, am I going to be tripping, man? Am I going to be like, should I take a couple of days off work? What's going to happen? They literally just think that they're going to trip. And, like Alan was saying earlier, it has properties and effects on the brain that are similar to a hallucinogenic, but it is not a hallucinogenic, nor is it harmful anywhere near in those quantities. You would die from ethanol poisoning long before you would have any harmful effects from the Thujon. Yep. So that's the bad, but ultimately when it comes down to it from a brand owner and a street peddler, for lack of a better terms,
Mhm.
is that we play off of the fact that people are the mystique. The mystique sells
Yep.
the absinthe almost more than anything else does.
Well,
On
if you look at the National Institute of Health, Thujan is the toxic agent in absinthe. That's
Keep in mind, and
that's
to
what
that point, the number one rule of toxicology is that everything in nature is toxic at a level.
Mhm.
Water will kill you. So it's funny that they list that as the toxic ingredient in absinthe when the ethanol is a chemical solvent.
100%.
Explain to me how that means. So you're trying to tell me that the
Yep.
ethanol isn't the toxic agent.
Well, and
Well-
all things not being fair either, you know, the sage oil has far more alpha thujone in it than any bottle of historic absinthe ever did. And that was what Ted Bro had to go through, was to prove in these old samples. He had to go buy the old samples and actually sample them and send them to laboratories and get gas chromatography done to prove that the level of thujone was not within toxic limits, whatever you want to say there. But you know, on Jim's point too, with the history and the mystification of absinthe, the other thing that you had is, and this is a very understudied part of absinthe history too, is by the time you hit the Belle Epoque and by the time phylloxera hits and the wines are going away, you have a couple things that happen. So you obviously have all these soldiers in a few decades before that came back from Africa that had been rationed absinthe because the water was unsafe to drink. They've developed a taste for it, right? And they're hanging out at the bars, and the young kids are coming out and hanging out with them, very much like what we saw here in the 50s and 60s, you know, with that sort of Lenny Bruce sort of crowd, right? That later becomes, you know, more of the hippies of the 60s, right? Very much related to one another to some degree or other. But what you see happening is that, much like the gin craze in England, absinthe starts to sell. And then you start seeing lesser grades of absinthe coming onto the market. And then you see the fly-by-night producers come in. And so a lot of those bad brands that were poisoning people were doing things such as coloring their green absinthe using copper salts, right? Heavy metal poisoning. That's a thing that's very much happening with absinthe at that time. As the wine industry comes back into it, and we should actually now ironically should thank those wine producers, they're what preserved absinthe, because everything they did to try to vilify absinthe, and even though they finally won and got it made illegal for asinine reasons, we would not have all those cool fucking posters and all that cool artwork that we can play off of that they gave us as free marketing materials. And absinthe certainly would not have lived on in the minds of people for the generations that it did, had the wine industry not absolutely vilified it in the method that they did and made such cool damn posters. Right?
100%.
I did just hear from Musée de Vinoge, by the way. I want to say this real quick. They didn't get any damage. They lost a few shingles. That's about it, but they are okay. So
Good. That's great. to hear.
If you don't mind me jumping in here, I would like to, because I don't think of the number one thing that I am confronted with, being on the social media side of things all the time, and with the brand and things like that, is the Thujan content, and can you make it? You know, is it real absinthe? You know, is it you know, it's not real absinthe. You know, European absinthe is real. American absinthe's not real. You're not using enough grand wormwood. You're not using grand wormwood at all. I would like to hear Alan describe how absinthe in the United States today compares with real absinthe. And is it real absinthe? Is it not real absinthe? Is it a version of it? I want to hear from what I would consider an expert in the industry. What is the description or explanation of that?
So here's the way I would say that. It is 100%. Well, not every brand is. I will say that first and foremost. What is in your bottle is 100% a real absinthe with real grand wormwood. And I know because I prototyped it with wormwood I grew in my backyard that is legit grand wormwood. And I know where Bill bought the wormwood to go into the absinthe that is being produced.
Next to the 92 Pontiac.
That's right. That's right. That'd be a four-banger Mustang there, Jim. But yes.
Four-banger Mustang, my bad.
With the tent peeling off. But anyways, so the long and short of it is there is a limitation in the United States on the amount of alpha thujone that is to be allowed into absinthe, and European standards do allow for a higher amount. But here's the thing. If you look at the tests, None of them get anywhere close to that higher amount. They're right in ballpark with what we're making in the United States, and the vintage versions are right in ballpark with what we're making in the United States as well. For the most part, there's a few exceptions here and there, but it is certainly real absinthe. There's no doubt about that. And I would also say that there are very few people who really have put the research or the effort in to know how to make a real absinthe. Those recipes are not easy to access. And when you do access them, say from the Duplay book or something of that nature, which everyone leans into, and some people just copy outright, and I think everybody knows some of those people, that recipe will get you in the ballpark, but that's not what they were really doing in France. It'll just give you an idea of what was there. So you got to dig a little deeper than that. It used to be TTB was real worried about that alpha thujone thing. And they used to always ask for samples of absinthe to test the alpha thujone. Now, because everything always changes and they'd find some new thing that's going to kill you next Thursday at 2:00 in the afternoon, they are very concerned about licorice root, because licorice root is a vasorestrictor. And so they've stopped giving a shit so much about the alpha thujone content of your wormwood and have started paying a whole lot more attention to, oh my God, how many grams of licorice root is in this? So,
Alan, did you tell me that that chartreuse actually was grandfathered in, and they don't monitor the amount of thujone in that, even though it's way higher than they would allow?
basically, yeah, it was more or less overlooked, right? You don't want to hurt the monastery. Let it go. It'd be
Nobody talks about going insane off of chartreuse.
right.
Well, and can we say that, like with whiskeys, right? There's standards. There's here's what it has to be a bourbon. Here's what it has to be an Irish whiskey. You know, those kind of things. They're when it comes to, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just want to just kind of throw this out there as a talking point, is that there's not a standard amount of thujone that has to be in a product for it to be called absinthe. It just has to have grand wormwood, fennel, star anise, and has to be between 110 and 150 proof, are the only specs that I've ever seen to be classified as an absinthe. Is that correct?
Classically, anise, fennel, and hyssop were the three big ones that they wanted to see in an absinthe. But you know, some people use fennel. You know, we use fennel in yours, and we do that because A, it was a classic Belle Epoque thing, but B, if you want a more savory absinthe, that's how you get a savory absinthe. But certainly the wormwood and the green anise, at least in my opinion, because hyssop, you know, it has a lot of anise characters to it anyways. Those are the two that I would say, if those are not the two primary things that you are building the backbone of your absinthe off of, and add whatever you want other than that botanical wise, as long as it's safe, as long as that grand wormwood and that green anise are in there, I feel like you've done your due diligence to make a true absinthe. So,
but there is no thujone level requirement. Period.
none.
Because back in the 1800s and early 1900s, they wouldn't have any way to even measure that.
They didn't even know that that's what they just presumed that that's what the issue was. Like we were talking about, they didn't have any way of really knowing that that's what the issue was. They just, you know, it is the nature of what it is.
So at what point did absinthe become illegal in the United States or in Europe?
1912.
1912?
Yeah.
And how long until it became legal again?
2007. It was banned for 95 years.
Yep. And every country was a little different about their ban. Some countries put it off a little longer, some a little shorter. It just
Spain
depended.
never banned it.
Yep.
Did Britain ban it?
Yep.
They did. Okay.
At one point, it was banned in every country in the world except for Spain.
Gotcha.
So we did make a couple. Just I don't want to toot our horn or whatever, but I do want to throw this out there. Is that you know, our absinthe obviously is a homage to Hemingway. Hemingway never got to drink absinthe legally in the United States while he was alive. So when we launched the absinthe, we had an absinthe event at the Hemingway house in Key West. So he had a house in Key West, and he had a house in Havana, Cuba, actually out in the countryside. But so we had a big absinthe dinner. It was a 5-course meal on the lawn of the Hemingway house. There was every 4-person table. There was an absinthe fountain, and we did an absinthe round in between each of the courses of the meal. It was a 100-person dinner right after COVID, or right on the cusp of COVID, because we had social distancing was still going on, and so we were limited to 100 people, even though it typically could hold 300. So imagine, so we made it. So there was the DJ was playing 1930s and 1940s music. Hemingway was a hunter and a fisherman, so we had bison steaks and fingerling potatoes and Key West pink shrimp skewers, and we had a whimsical green fairy dessert. We had a salad with fennel in it, those kind of things. And then so and then when you walked in before you were seated at your table, we gave everybody a champagne flute with a Death in the Afternoon cocktail that they were sipping on while they were waiting to go sit at the table. The music playing. So the whole thing was pretend like you're sitting on Hemingway's lawn at his house, having an absinthe drink with Mr. Hemingway, listening to the kind of music he would have been listening to in his house, eating the kind of food that he would have ate, drinking the cocktail he would have been drinking. But there was also a historical event because it was the first time absinthe was ever consumed illegally on the Hemingway property. And then in January, we went over to Havana, Cuba, took a group of 18 people over there with some Death in the Afternoon and set up an absinthe fountain and did a full absinthe service in front of the Pilar on the Hemingway estate. I had to pay off the guard. That's the way it works in Cuba, right? You go, hey, no. And you're like, oh, there you go. Oh, I didn't see nothing, sir. Yeah, did a whole video and did the whole setup. So, and we made history again by having absinthe legally for the first time on the Hemingway estate in Cuba.
Very cool.
I got another thing here I want to throw in real quick. So this is one of my favorite quotes ever. This is the most Key West thing that you'll ever hear in your life. And B, this might actually be the first tweet that was ever sent out in 1931. So this is Hemingway talking about absinthe when he was living in Key West. So, and it does sound like a tweet. The words are, got tight last night on absinthe and did knife tricks. Great success shooting the knife into the piano. The woodworms are so bad and eat the hell out of all furniture that you can always claim the woodworms did it.
Yes.
Is that 140 characters? I don't know.
I'm trying to put it on Twitter right now.
It's pretty close. It's pretty close.
Sorry, whatever.
Yeah.
92 fast back.
Yeah. It's still Twitter. Whatever. So the resurgence of absinthe, banned for 95 years, and has made a really good comeback. I've read some statistics that say in 2023 the market for absinthe was measured at about $143 million. It's projected to grow.
Oh, damn, we missed out on that.
Yeah, I don't know. But you're on the cusp of something big, because in the next 10 years it's supposed to go to 274 million. So it's almost going to double in the next 10 years. So there's been in the grand scheme of the spirits industry, that's a very small sliver, but that small sliver is going to grow quite a bit over the next 10 years. What do you all see as the reasoning for that kind of growth?
Well, I think if you don't mind me just asking a quick question real quick, because this has to do with the growth of the absinthe market in the next 10 years. Alan, what was the warranty on those gutters you had put on your house? Is it 5-year or 10-year? When do those need to be replaced?
We might need to negotiate some percentages or something here, because if I could get like an 18th of that sliver, I would be pretty happy, truthfully. So I think that what is driving that as much as anything is that we figured out how to make absinthe again, finally, first and foremost. Some of the big companies have tried to put some money into absinthe, and good. It's a bigger boat for all of us. That's fine. I don't care. Let them pay for the advertising, and we'll just reap the rewards from it. Secondarily, though, I think, and here comes the hate mail from everybody, and I don't care. So I think that bourbon bubble is about to pop, as I've talked about before. You've already seen DSP permits go down. You're seeing some distilleries close. There's a massive shakeout coming. Population growth has not happened and will not happen in the foreign countries that they have been targeting for the past 2 decades. And so they're going to dump all that stuff on the domestic market. And honestly, truthfully, the bourbon industry has been shoving bourbon down everyone's throat for the past 2 years as hard as what they could. We now have a generation of more adventurous drinkers that were very, very picky, that were very hard to make brand loyal, and they're starting to become brand loyal, but they are not product loyal. They like to drink diversely. They like cocktails like what Brian does. They like the authenticity of the spirit. They like the authenticity of the history of the particular spirit. And so I see those things really being whatever would have been considered niche a few years ago, and yes, it's still very niche, is becoming certainly much more popular now, and is being spoken to by the amount of different base alcohols that can be used to make absinthe. You can make absinthe fit into many traditions. You know, you could have a mezcal based absinthe, you know, not mezcal based, mezcal based, but not a mezcal, right? A US agave spirit based absinthe, play off of marigolds. I've prototyped that sort of thing before. It exists. It's a thing that can happen, and it works very, very well between those two unique cultures. So I don't know what the hell that noise was. That was like somebody's running around there with trying to carjack somebody with a hairdryer in Key West. So there's the police. I called it.
Cops. It's the cops, man.
Sorry about that.
Everybody be cool.
Be cool, man.
Right. So that's my thoughts on it. I think people are more than willing to drink a little bit more diverse. And they want to. Why wouldn't they? Right. And maybe, just maybe, people are smart enough that they don't need the TTB to tell them that there should be a category called functional alcohol. Maybe they've started to notice things about drinking absinthe. Like, strangely enough, it's very hard to get hungover on absinthe. I'll let you figure out which botanical it is that causes that effect, but it is one of the botanicals.
Good to know. Good to know.
Well, I think I'd also say too, to what Alan and I talk about all the time, is that there's in bourbon and whiskeys in general, and some of these categories or whatever, they don't give you much wiggle room to create new products or to do anything innovative or whatever, because it's like NASCAR, right? Everyone has to have the certain motor and has to have a certain setup, and you can't really, it's not like NASCAR used to be back in the day where you could put gadgets and gizmos on there and push the envelope and test things. Right. Absinthe is working to our advantage right now from a distillation standpoint and from a marketing standpoint and everything else, is that we've got a pretty wide lane to do different things, you know, and I think that was part of what made absinthe popular back when I went to France and migrated around Europe. This different regions have different botanicals and different herbs and different flowers and things that you can throw into the absinthe and go, wow, that was a different color on it, or that gives it a little extra effect, or marigolds are cool, right? You know, so, you know, I think the millennials are more into more complexity to start with, right? So they like old school, they like complexity, they like you know, that's why I think gins are more popular and going to be more popular. I think botanical based spirits in general just lend itself to you know, mathematically a bunch more combinations than whiskeys or vodka. Well, you know,
I think people like Brian doing education, and specifically the Victorian Barroom, pushing interesting, unique things that are old and new at the same time. That's what's really going to help us. You and I, Jim, we can talk all day to consumers, but if they hear it from someone like Brian, who's not vested in a company, it makes a lot more sense. They trust somebody like Brian. They understand somebody like Brian. I mean, at least as well as you can understand somebody that makes their own clothes, but you know.
In the Victorian context, bourbon is seldom mentioned as far as the spirit for cocktails or anything. And as a Kentuckian, somebody who actually lives here, I would love to see bourbon just go back to the regular folks drink. You know,
blue collar drink, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, that would improve our lives here quite a bit.
Yep.
And me being a purist and where I come from, you know, we still believe that bourbon shouldn't be made outside of Kentucky, period. Sorry, Alan.
We're not going there.
Listen,
don't get me on Tennessee now.
We're already an hour and a half in. We're not going there.
You give me an 18th of that absinthe sliver, and I'll never make another drop of bourbon in my life.
How many gutters do you need in your lifetime, Alan? How many?
A lot of gutters.
One of the things, Jim, you mentioned was different botanicals from different regions. So is there a terroir aspect that can be brought to absinthe, and can that be part of the appeal that drives that growth?
I think personally, I believe in unfortunately in the United States, Europe, like Alan was saying, you get up in some of these mountains, some of these regions or whatever, you get into France and Spain and different places, wildly growing. They have amazing and beautiful plants and plant species and stuff. And people grow things there, and people historically for hundreds of years have just grown things and sustained themselves. In the United States, unfortunately, we grow corn for Monsanto, and that's pretty much it. So we got corn and taters and tomatoes, and that's all we got, right? So it's not like we have these huge varietals and stuff unless we start planting them. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I don't think the millennials these days are going to be planting varietals of botanicals anywhere, so we have to import them. So, but I think that's what happened, in my personal opinion, from what I've read. I think that's what happened in Europe. Was that they're surrounded by all of these plants. They're like, let's just throw a little, just like a recipe, right? They're like, let's just throw a little bit of this in there, and a little of that, and we got a giant grove of it growing in the backyard. Let's grab some of that, see what that does to it. Whoa, that color's cool.
Yep.
So in America, I don't know what you would do differently because we just don't have the variety.
I think you will see that happen to some degree, and you can certainly pick up terroir and absinthe over time, especially with these smaller craft distillers. I know of a couple that are growing their own Grand Wormwood. I grow a lot of my own Grand Wormwood. I can tell you that the Grand Wormwood that I grow in Indiana is far different than any of the wormwood that I bought anywhere else, including from France, specifically in that it's growing in a much heavier. Need to see if hold on. Let me see if I'm in trouble here, and I'll finish this conversation.
Is Alan in trouble?
It's a possibility.
While he's pausing there
okay.
for a minute, just to throw this out there real quick. Go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
So I was going to say that in the clay soil here, we get a much more bitter wormwood. And if you look, Jim, like at the prototyping that we did for you versus what Bill actually made, it is a much, much heavier profile on that wormwood because that was all Indiana grown wormwood. Certainly, one of the things that Indiana is very famous, well, used to be, and people don't recognize it anymore. So just like Kentucky has mint for mint juleps, right? You're growing peppermint for mint juleps, and you have a specific strain. Indiana is actually famous for spearmint, and the spearmint that grows here is about 10 times heavier in oil content than the spearmint that grows anywhere else in the world. So there's certainly the ability, but not on scale, right? These are going to be small craft distilleries that are quick, that you'll be able to maybe experience some of those things at, as opposed to being on scale with one of the big companies. And they're certainly, we're lucky to have not so much the younger millennials and below growing botanicals, but there's a lot of people in our sort of age range, mid 30s up through 50s that have returned to the land and are growing a number of botanicals. Now, what we really need is somebody to grow Absinthe Ponica, petite wormwood, because it's a pain in the ass to grow and everything kills it. And I'm done. I'm not doing it no more. I've had enough of that shit and wasted enough of my time and money on it.
But a little known fact to throw out there, just for something funny, is that behind the Hemingway house in Key West is a whole patch of grand wormwood that grows back there behind the Hemingway house. And it's a thing. People have, over the years or whatever, have broke into the Hemingway house at night to steal the grand wormwood and gotten caught. They had to actually extend the fence up higher and stuff because people were just, it was a thing for a long time. They couldn't keep people out of the Hemingway house for whatever reason.
See how much wormwood and how many 6-toed cats I can put in that 92 4-banger.
Oh my God. Probably freaking out because the cats go, dude, did you see that the cats have 6 toes, man? So that's just a weird little tidbit fact there. And we're still going to piss off that light tower too at some point whenever it comes down.
That's happening. It's a thing.
Did you guys hear about pissing off the light tower?
Yes.
So Alan thinks the lighthouse is a light tower.
Listen, we don't have those in Indiana, Jim.
We've had that conversation. Yes. Okay. Getting back to the terroir of absinthe. You can have, the thing about that is nobody's going to say, oh, well, that craft distiller's absinthe is too young. Okay. They're not going to be able to dismiss it with that kind of phraseology like they may with a bourbon or a rye. So once you get it out there, and I think you're right, Alan, if the big guys start to make absinthe, great. They're doing all the marketing for you. Now people can go and can explore different things and different approaches to it. and see where that goes without the shaming of, oh, well, that's too young. That is in the lexology of bourbon.
Yeah. Now, one of the things there that does come into play, though, and this is be a very minor group of people. It's tend to be the same ones that Jim has a penchant for pissing off somehow by his very existence. I'm not sure what's up there, but there is it's not abnormal to oxidatively age absinthe for about a year, and a lot of people don't do that. But the other thing that they're really big on is it's actually preferred and common with wormwood if you have a good wormwood producer, and you'll certainly see a lot of this in France with biodynamic farmers and even the Val de Traverse. So they don't just dry the wormwood. They very specifically will only use wormwood that's been cut from patches that are 3 years old or older. And the older that patch is, the better as far as they're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dried wormwood itself is actually aged much like tobacco. And the older the wormwood is, the more vivacious the spirit is said to be. So at some point you will see the geekery reach those levels.
Kind of like a 23-year-old Pappy or a 15-year Knob Creek. Those are better.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think at some point you're going to have, and it's kind of one of our phases of our process is to create a botanical farm and grow botanicals and age them like tobacco or whatever, do all the things that are necessary. At some point, someone's going to do that and provide botanicals to the spirits industry. And to your point, Kevin, I think for millennials or for people that are, wanting to explore into absinthe when it starts to get more mainstream and becomes a thing, it will be a lot easier. Because, like I say, you don't have to have rick houses and spend all the you guys have been ranting, especially like Bill the other day when I talked to him was just ranting about how much barrels cost these days, like unbelievable amount of money that barrels cost. So then absinthe is going to be more appealing when it's more popular, and gins and absinthes and botanical spirits, because there's so much creativity involved. You don't have to age it, like you were saying, Kevin. That could be something that, and it's very hard then if somebody's making a good product. Because they come up with a cool recipe, it's going to be hard to say that it's not.
Right.
Even if they're a brand new distiller, if they've only been doing it for a little amount of time, it's an easier thing, I think, for someone to make than aging a spirit.
Right. I also will say this: it's a very easy kickstart program too. Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois. Those are all primed places where you could grow a lot of these botanicals. Not all of them, and certainly like green anise, like Spain is really the place to go for green anise for the oil content, etc. But if you had a small farmer, you had some young folks that had a farm and they needed a little extra income. If that farm just so happened to have been a tobacco farm at any point in time, it's already primed to be set up to grow some wormwood and to be able to age that wormwood with very minimal modification, very minimal money that a distillery could put into that program, and work with a farmer to make a good high quality absinthe from the region.
And they probably got a tobacco barn that they could hang up the wormwood and age it.
Yep, absolutely.
Or dry it or do whatever. And that's where the creativity, I think, in the future is going to come from. It's like just like they're doing with over in Ireland and Scotland and stuff. Where they're doing the different methods over there. Is it just came out of necessity? They're just like, well, what if we try this? What if we try that? Started tweaking on something that typically was this is the way you do it, kind of a thing. Where with absinthe, there's a whole lot of runway there and a lot of leeway, to create very unique spirits, but still be classified. And that'll be the interesting part is once they get absinthe defined by the TTB, what will be the definition?
What is it? Yeah.
What is the definition? And how vague will the definition be, or how constricting the definition will be?
Yeah, TTB's quality organization, they never get it wrong. So
those 800 plus new TTB agents really appreciate you saying that, Kevin.
They're fantastic.
Over the last couple of years, I wonder how many people have called the TTB to file a complaint against me poisoning the public with illegal grand wormwood.
Illegal grand wormwood. Hey,
I was watching this show and this guy said that he grows his wormwood in gutters in Indiana.
He says they do it. He says it right on the internet.
And they use the planting medium as absinthe or as amethyst crystals.
And I would say, Kevin, up to this point too, like we've stayed way on track. We're like it's very hard to keep us on.
We haven't sank the ship yet.
Well, we're trying. We're trying. Jim, I want you to talk a little bit about what you're doing as far as invest now in legalized absinthe.
Yeah. So, and that's another thing that I get people give me, it doesn't matter what you do. The keyboard cowboys, are going to come after you no matter what it is you do. And so one of the things that the keyboard cowboys come after me about is when I say things like recently legalized or whatever, they're like, recently legalized back 2007, man. What are you talking about? It's like 20 years ago. And but it's like absinthe is like 250 years old, right? So, and it was illegal for 100 years, pretty much 100 years. So yeah, I would say 2007 is recently legalized. And then not to mention that when you legalize it, there was like one brand making it. You know what I mean? So it's still, even when you legalize a product, it takes the industry to catch up with even making anything. So I'd say just in the last, 4 or 5 years, we've really even seen any players coming onto the market, with products, and, and to Alan's point that he made earlier is that, all we need is the big boys to jump into the arena and legitimize the space. And they're probably waiting for the TTB to create the category. And then they probably already have products ready to go in the legalized category or, the created category. So they can call it an absinthe. Everyone else in the world can put absinthe on the label and call it an absinthe, except the United States. We have to call it an absinthe vert or absinthe something, or we have to play with the fancy names and stuff or whatever. But that's just the TTB. Let's not get into the rant about how dumb the TTB. I mean, I'm sorry. They're very good people, but
hang on. Well, one thing while we're talking about the TTB.
Did they call you?
No. Wait a minute. Mitch
they just sent you a text message. They're like, you better shut her down.
They don't do that They don't do that anymore. They now.
They're just
shut her down. Shut her down. Unplug it.
Door. I remember when the TTB approved 125 proof bottled in bond whiskey. Yes. They're pros.
Well, what we're doing with the project with Alan is Skippy's Mistake Gin, which is a Florida citrus gin. It's a citrus gin. It's a gin flavored with citrus, right?
Yep.
We can't call it a citrus gin. You can't even refer to it as citrus. And if you put citrus anywhere near the name, then you have to go through this entire other process of what did you flavor it with? And they think you put chemicals in it. And they want you to define the chemicals, and you're like, oranges and key limes. Right. So like the TTB is so backwards, so you just have to call it a gin. It's like, well, then it's, how do you tell the customer that it's a citrus gin? Well, you can't. So they've kicked the label back like 7 times because we keep trying to refer to citrus or whatever in some way. The only way we could really call it a citrus gin is if we put a citrus chemical in it and define the chemical.
So, but to invest
I'm off track.
What you're doing, I believe it's $249 for minimum investment.
Yeah. So startengine.com was our offering is on Start Engine, which is a crowdfunding platform. And what we're trying to do specifically is the company's always been debt free, no partners, no investors, no anything. And I've built the company just with cash, and the money that comes in, we put it back in the company. And that's why things have moved with this slow pace that they go at. And that's the reason the other products aren't out yet, because we have to pay for them. They're ready to go. But I believe, and I think Alan and a lot of people that are in the industry believe, is it's not going to be that much longer until it becomes a category and before the big guys get into it. We've been in it for a while now, and we need to get into New Orleans, and we need to get more established in the marketplace so that when it does happen, we're the ones that have been around a while. And all it does is just bring us up to a higher level. And so that timing is of the essence right now, because it's not like we're just putting out a whiskey and 7 years from now it's going to come out. We'll have a 7-year whiskey or something like that. It's a critical point for the company to get out in front of it so that we are out in front whenever the big boys come and hit the space, and then rising tides raise all ships. Right. Yeah. So Start Engine is a crowdfunding platform. To do our entire expansion, we need $1.25 million to get the products out on the market, to launch into New Orleans, to finish our expansion in Miami. And then that's also seed money for the botanical farm out here in South Florida. So the crowdfunding campaign on Start Engine is, if you guys have seen Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, this is one of his companies. He's a major investor in that company. And it is just a platform. In order to do crowdfunding, you have to use a third-party platform, and Startengine is the largest platform in the United States, and it's a SEC offering, it's a Reg CF offering. It is for equity in the company, so it's $1.50 a share. We have a $6 million valuation right now. It's $1.50 a share. It's a $249 minimum investment, and the way that you make money in this type of investment is on the exit. So when we build the company to be X dollars, then we exit, and then all of the shareholders, make their X return on investment. No guarantees, but that's the name of the game, so to speak. And we're at a $6 million pre-money valuation, and then as we raise more money and the company grows, then those investments that came in at $1.50 when it's worth $6 or $7 or whatever, obviously that's the increase in value. Which in crowdfunding, that's the gamble, right? Everything's a gamble, but it's like, instead of just getting a steady 10%, if you get 10% on your money on investment, you're doing really well. This type of investment has the potential to get you X, 10X, 8X, 10X, that kind of thing.
So for the price of what you would pay on the secondary market for the old Forester's next distillery release, you can be an investor in Key West Trading Company. So why not?
What? Alan needs gutters.
It's true.
So, all right, let's start kind of wrapping things up here. And I want to give everybody a chance to just make a few closing comments about Absinthe, what it means to you, where you see it headed. Brian, let's start with you.
It was always something that fascinated me. I mean, being, just interested in the whole Victorian kind of scheme of things. And I had limited exposure to it, but always enjoyed what I did have with it, and never thought I'd have the chance to get hands on with it even after we started the Locust Grove Distillery project. So I was just really glad when Alan approached me with that idea, and we were able to do it. And then the work he's doing up there at Spirits of French Lick is amazing. The Le Bleu is my wife's favorite. Absinthe is out there, and then, like I say, the Key West, it's gone now, but that really kicked up the quality of the stuff that I was making right here. So I really appreciate y'all including me in this conversation, and I think we've got a lot of interesting adventures ahead of us.
Yeah, Jim, how about you? Final comments?
Yeah, I'm happy that we're even having a conversation about absinthe. Period. Because I didn't think we would ever have conversations outside of whiskey.
Right.
It's not like we're gonna have vodka conversations.
No.
So so I think it's exciting. It opens up a whole new world. I think. Like everyone was saying, and Alan even pointed out to us that bubble's going to burst at some point or whatever, and it's kind of been talked out. And now we've got a whole new playground of topics and themes and cool stuff. And it's not like it's a brand new thing that was just created last week. This has a huge, long, rich history that has all this really cool stuff that goes along with it, and the ghosts and the alchemy and all the cool stuff that goes with it. So I think, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of more conversations like this that can be had by some creative people that haven't even started looking at it yet.
Yep. Alan?
Well, I think the great thing, the big takeaway for me, for anybody who wants to get into absinthe, the thing that I can tell them is two pieces of advice. So the first one is that absinthe is not catered to a world of fast-paced bullshit. And so absinthe is a great opportunity to escape that and step outside of it, and maybe even slow things down for yourself and watch other people's mistakes happen in front of you in real time in a very lucid state. Secondarily, the best piece of advice I can give you, if you've had a rough day and you're feeling a little bitchy, about 5 o'clock, have an absinthe and a coffee and shut the fuck up. You're welcome.
That absinthe and coffee thing is new. I never even thought or heard of that. Putting absinthe with coffee.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I hope everyone that's been watching has some great takeaways in terms of some cocktail ideas. You've learned some things about the history of absinthe, how it's made, where it's headed, and I want to thank Brian and Jim and Alan for being a part of this. This is I really enjoyed it, and we'll have another Bar Cart Co-op show sometime in the second quarter of 2024. So be on the lookout for that. Always a fun time. Always some great guests. So until then, everyone have a wonderful evening. Cheers.
Thank you, Kevin.
Cheers.